So with this practice, there were 4 things we were going to look at. The first was the qualities: relaxation, stability, clarity. The second topic we looked at in the last session was what object to use in this practice. And again, the general recommendation is use the object that works best for you. And within that, we've picked 3 objects for these 2 days. 3 objects that are, I think, particularly suitable for us in the modern world. The first of those, the one we're using today, is the breath. That's probably the one that's going to be most suitable for many of us, particularly in the modern world, because often the meditation texts say something like, if you're the sort of person who's highly discursive, meaning always thinking, then definitely the best object for you is the breath. So I think that accounts for most of people in the modern world. We're all living in the head, all this conceptual, discursive thinking. So by focusing on the physical sensations of the breath, of course it gets us out of our obsessive compulsive thinking and into the body, so that's good. And most of our thinking is about the past and the future. And from a Buddhist perspective, and modern studies are coming to the same conclusion, living in the past and the future is a source of a lot of unnecessary unhappiness. Physical sensations of the breath only happen in the present moment. So by focusing on them, we get out of our obsessive compulsive thinking and we get out of the past and the future into the present moment. So very good object. And that's the one we're using today. Tomorrow we're going to be looking at the 2 other objects. First, observing the mind, and the other one is simply resting in awareness itself. And we'll talk more about those practices tomorrow. So the next topic related to this training is, what tools are we using in this practice? So the 2 tools we use in this practice are mindfulness and introspection. So remember, mindfulness is basically to remember the object. So mindfulness is our ability to remember the object, to hold the object without forgetting it, without becoming distracted. But we need a second tool along with mindfulness, and that is called introspection. And introspection is like quality control, is monitoring the mindfulness. How is that mindfulness going? Are we still holding the object, or are we starting to become distracted or dull? So introspection is quality control, noticing if we're becoming dull or distracted. And if we become dull or distracted, then the solution, of course, is reapply mindfulness to hold the object again. And this we can see in the handout that we should all have a copy of. If we look on the front page here, and we'll look at this chart in more detail later, but just for now we see down the bottom here the meditator, and the meditator in the left hand is a rope, in the right hand is a hook. The rope is symbolizing mindfulness, so the symbolism there is that we are tying our mind with the rope of mindfulness to the object. And then the hook of introspection is to monitor that, and if we notice we become dull or distracted, to hook the mind back and reapply mindfulness. So that is the symbolism here in this diagram, these 2 tools. And remember again, mindfulness in a lot of modern day mindfulness traditions has been redefined to mean something like a non-judgmental awareness of whatever is arising in the present moment. So just to be aware that how mindfulness is often used in modern traditions versus in Buddhism, there's some slight difference there. So here mindfulness, again, is simply our ability to hold the object, to remember the object, to not forget it, to not become distracted. And here we have a quote actually from a Sangha, who's a great 5th century Buddhist master, and he says, "Mindfulness and introspection are taught. For the first prevents the attention from straying from the meditation object, while the second, that is introspection, recognizes that the attention is straying. So again, introspection is like quality control. Any questions about these tools? One other thing is that of the two tools, mindfulness is the main one. And you'll find that the more you improve your mindfulness, the more your ability to monitor that will automatically improve. So sort of introspection is improving as a byproduct of improving the mindfulness. So really mindfulness is really the main tool of those two. Then let's look at the last topic I want to focus on for this practice, and that is the faults. What sort of faults can come up in this practice and how do we overcome that? And for this we can look at the second page of your handout. At the top, the sentence at the top says, Shamata is attained by progressing through the 9 stages, and the 9 stages are these 9 stages along this windy road that we'll look at later, relying on the 8 antidotes to abandon the 5 faults. So here we see in the table just below that, we see the 5 faults and the 8 antidotes. So let's have a look at those now. So the first fault here is laziness. So just like everything in our life, if we see no benefit in something, we'll be very lazy when it comes to putting any effort into that. So similarly here, if we really don't appreciate the benefits of this practice, we're going to be very lazy in coming to do this practice. So to overcome laziness, we first need to reflect and understand on the benefits of this practice. And if we can really appreciate that this practice is going to give us a lot of benefit, we'll have the first antidote, that is faith. So here faith is faith that this practice is going to benefit us greatly. The more faith we have in the practice by understanding the benefits of the practice, the more we will have the second antidote, which is aspiration, which is that we'll want to do the practice, we'll aspire to do the practice. The more we aspire to do the practice, the more we'll have the third antidote, that is enthusiasm or effort, that we'll have a lot of enthusiasm and put a lot of effort into the practice. And the more enthusiasm and effort that we put into the practice, the more we'll get the fourth antidote, which is pliancy. Pliancy here means flexibility and serviceability of body and mind. Now our body and mind are not very pliant or flexible. We have a lot of aches and pains in the body, and we have a lot of resistance in our mind to the practice. But the more effort we put into the practice, the more flexible and serviceable our body and mind will become. And we'll really achieve what's called physical and mental pliancy when we achieve Shamata. And that is symbolized here in the diagram in the middle at the top. This diagram in the middle at the top is the goal of Shamata. And so there we see two things. We see the person flying through the sky. That's symbolizing what's called physical pliancy. It's said that when we achieve this goal of Shamata, our body feels light like cotton. And so that's symbolized by the person flying through the sky. And then mental pliancy is symbolized by the person riding on the elephant of the mind. Here meaning that we can now, there's no resistance in our mind whatsoever. We can turn our mind to whatever we want without any resistance whatsoever. So that is the mental pliancy. So these are the two things that we really fully achieve when we achieve this goal of Shamata. So this is the first fault of laziness, and these are the 4 antidotes to laziness. The second fault here is forgetfulness, which can mean either forgetting the instructions or forgetting the object. So of course the antidote to forgetfulness is mindfulness, is to remember the instructions, to remember the object, to hold the object. Then the third fault is the pair of laxity and excitation. Laxity is the technical term for dullness, and excitation is the most common form of distraction. That we get distracted by things which are exciting to us, the so-called sense pleasures. And we see that in the diagram again. If you look a little bit up from the bottom on the left-hand side, you see a bowl of fruit. So this is taste. Beside that, you see a silk cloth. So that's touch or tactile. Slightly above that, we have two round objects, which are symbols, which is sound. To the left of that, we have a shell with perfume in it. So that's smell. And then diagonally above that, we have a round object, which is a mirror. So that's visual objects. So these are the 5 sense objects, which are the most common form of distraction. So that's why here we have, instead of distraction, we have excitation or excitement listed as the distraction. Now, how to overcome dullness and distraction? We sort of introduced that a little bit in the last meditation, and there's a couple of key words here that can help remind us, particularly as a beginner, what to do if we get dull or we get distracted. So the 3 key words which can be useful to remind us what to do if we get distracted is the first is to relax. Because the tendency can be that if we get distracted, we get frustrated, we get upset, and we clamp, we tighten more forcibly, because that's our habit. So to counteract that, 1, to be happy that you've noticed you got distracted, and then the very first thing to do is just simply relax. Then release the distraction, just let go of the distraction, and then return to the object, but without clamping down more forcefully. Just very gently return to the object. So relax, release, return for distraction. And then in terms of dullness, we also have 3 key words that can help remind us what to do. And that is refresh, restore, retain. Now, one of the most common reasons we become quite dull and drowsy is that we simply have lost interest in the practice. Same as at home, anywhere. You know, if we're watching a program on TV that's not very interesting, probably we're sort of getting very drowsy and sleepy and maybe fall asleep on the couch. Of course, if the program is very interesting, even if we're a bit tired, we're going to be fully there. So similarly in the practice, particularly something like the breath, we can just sort of drift into dullness because we've lost interest in the practice. So if we notice we're getting very dull because we're not enthusiastic about the practice, first thing to do is refresh our interest in the practice. So just briefly reflect on, why am I doing this practice and what are the benefits of this practice to really make ourselves more enthusiastic. And then, of course, to restore our attention, so to reapply mindfulness, and then to retain the flow of mindfulness, to retain that flow of mindfulness. And with both of these, particularly now that we're using the breath, this can be something very helpful to do on every out-breath. Because what can often happen is that we slowly start tightening our body and mind. But if on every out-breath we are emphasizing relaxing the body and mind, releasing any tension, and if we get distracted, return. If we're doing it on every out-breath, that can help avoid slowly tensing the body and mind. Likewise, to avoid slowly drifting into dullness, on every in-breath, we sharpen our focus. We arouse our attention and sharpen the focus. So relaxing on the out breath, sharpening the focus on the in breath. So we can keep the mind balanced to overcome these two imbalances on every breath. Any questions about that? Yeah. Restore means to just reapply mindfulness, and retain means then keep holding that, retain that flow of mindfulness over time. Don't restore and then just let it go again. Retain and then hold it. Hold that object. Now, of course, the prevention is the best cure. So there are certain things we can do to prevent the likelihood of dullness and distraction. One of those, of course, is to keep your sessions short as a beginner. If we try and meditate too long, high probability we're just going to end up in dullness and distraction, or probably both. So keep the sessions short and always emphasize quality over quantity. How long to meditate as a beginner will depend on us as an individual. But I think as a beginner, what we're doing in this 2 days, 20 minutes, is usually a sort of a good ballpark figure. It's enough time to get into the practice, but not too much time that we're just completely in dullness and distraction. But some of you may find 20 minutes a little bit long. You might prefer 15. Some of you may prefer to go a little bit longer than 20. But pick an amount of time that you can sort of sustain with enthusiasm. And then over time, as we go deeper into the practice, we'll need to extend that a little bit to go further in the practice, but always emphasizing quality over quantity. When to extend how long you meditate is when your normal experience is that at the end of your meditation, your normal experience is, oh, I would have liked to have done a little bit more. If that's your normal experience, then that's the time to extend a bit more. But don't sort of double from 20 to 40, 3 to 5 minute increment. But always emphasizing quality over quantity. If you want to meditate longer, but you can't sustain it, break that session into shorter sessions with a little break in the middle. So let's say you want to meditate 30 minutes every morning, but you can't sustain 30, then do 15 minutes, 2-minute break, another 15 minutes. So keep it short and many sessions. Also, of course, environmental conditions are important when we meditate at home. If where we meditate is too hot, too stuffy, too dark, probably you're going to get very dull. If it's too much light, too cold, maybe agitation. So adjust temperature and light according to what is suitable for you. Also, of course, noise is a big distraction in Shamata practice. So try to find a quiet place to meditate. Of course, many of us living in a city environment, that's not so easy. So then what I'd recommend is that if you're in an environment that is normally quite noisy, is to use modern technology to help. I use this quite often, noise-cancelling headphones. So if you're in a noisy environment, I would suggest they're a very good investment. Noise-cancelling headphones can be very, very helpful for that purpose. And whenever I'm in a noisy environment, I always use them. And I find them very helpful. And of course, I like to not compromise. I buy top of the range because it's much better. So I've got like the top of the range Bose noise-cancelling headphone, and I find them very helpful. Particularly when I'm traveling or in a noisy environment, I use them all the time. So you might like to think about that if you're in a noisy environment in general where you meditate. There's a question at the back.
Yeah, would you recommend given, like, if you don't have the noise-cancelling headphones, would you recommend white noise or something like that?
Of course, white noise that's basically what noise-cancelling headphones do. It's white noise. I mean, there is some noise there, and that's why it can cancel out the noise. So yes, some sort of white noise, if you don't have, can be, because that's much preferable than the noise that's sudden and that's pulling your attention. Sure. But ideally, of course, no noise is the ideal scenario, but that's not so easy to achieve in most places. Okay. The other thing is two things with dullness and distraction which are particularly relevant in our modern society. The first is we need to get enough sleep. I mean, the reality is that our modern lives are very busy. We don't have enough time for everything. So what we tend to do in the modern world, what we cut is we cut our sleep from 8 to 7 to 6 to 5 to 4 to even 3 hours a night. And somehow we sort of manage on that, but that's not going to work for meditation. So we need to make sure we get enough quality sleep. Otherwise, we're just going to go into dullness for sure. The other thing that's unfortunately tends to be a big factor in modern world with meditation is diet. That particularly one of the worst things in diet is too much sugar. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we seem to have this epidemic of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in young kids today is often, I mean, there are many factors, but one of the main factors is diet, particularly too much refined foods, particularly way too much sugar. So we need to look at our diet, make sure we have a healthy diet, make sure we get enough sleep if we're wanting to prevent dullness and distraction. Otherwise, I think we're just going to be constantly in dullness and distraction. Any questions about that before we look at the next practice, the practice of observing the abdomen?
Yeah. I have a question that might sound stupid, but who cares? It's a technical question. When we practice, right, and then I manage to hold the concentration and everything, and then I tell myself, I mean, I talk to myself, okay?
Yeah.
And I say, okay, you've got it, keep it going, keep it steady.
Yeah.
Isn't that a distraction?
Right. This is a very good question, very important question, and it's to do with commentary. And commentary, there's what's called cost-benefit, meaning that as a beginner, I think most of us need some commentary to remind us of what to do. If we don't keep reminding us, because we're not familiar with it, if we don't keep reminding ourselves of what to do, we're just going to fall into dullness and distraction and not do the practice. It's like when we learned to drive a car, we needed commentary. Say, okay, look in the mirror, do this, push that. No? Otherwise, we're just lost. Same in this practice. We're lost as a beginner if we don't have some. So that's the benefit of commentary, is to help us to get into the practice. The cost is, of course, that it is commentary. It's the same as driving a car. I mean, now if we're driving a car, if we did what we did when we learned to drive a car, we'd go crazy if we're always having this commentary. Now it's automatic because we know what to do. So similarly in this meditation practice, as a beginner, not only is commentary helpful, for many of us it's necessary. Otherwise we forget what we're supposed to do. But then, of course, we need to, over time, as we get into the practice and become familiar with it, we need to cut down, and eventually it becomes an automatic thing like driving a car. So we need to sort of have that cost benefit and reduce the amount of commentary as we become more and more familiar with the practice. Otherwise, it becomes an obstacle. Like now, if you're driving your car and you had to do that commentary, you go nuts. But as a beginner, you have to do it. So that's what we need to do in this practice as well. Some commentary to remind us what to do, and when we get more and more familiar, slowly let go of that, and eventually let go of it altogether. Because otherwise it becomes a cost rather than a benefit. But we can decide that as we go in the practice. Okay, the practice of now focusing on the abdomen. So the abdomen, of course, we're talking about the focusing on the rising and lowering of the abdomen as we breathe. And it's a fairly large area of focus, so this is good for stabilizing our attention. And so that's what we're going to do in this practice now. And of course, we're focusing on the actual sensations of the rising and lowering of the abdomen, what's called bare attention. So we're not visualizing, imagining the abdomen going up and down. We're actually focusing on the sensations directly. And what we're going to introduce in this practice is, again, a little thing as a trick as a beginner that can help us to be more focused. And that is that if we get distracted a lot, what can help us as a beginner to stay more focused is to count the breath. So again, counting the breath has cost benefit because it's conceptual activity, but as a beginner, it can be helpful to stay more focused. And so we're going to introduce that in this practice. And particularly if we get heavily distracted, it can be useful to stay focused. But then as we get deeper into the practice, that counting the breath starts to become a bit of an obstacle. So eventually we'll need to let go of it. But we'll practice it a little bit just so we know what to do. There are many ways of counting the breath. What we're going to do in this practice is at the end of the in-breath, just mentally note 1, and then focus on the sensations of the breath on the out-breath and the following in-breath, and then mentally note 2. And we're going to count 1 up to 10, and then go back to 1. If you lose count at any point, you forget where you're up to, you just go back to 1. So we're going to introduce that partway through the meditation to see if it's helpful for stabilizing our attention. Some people find it very helpful, other people not so helpful. So we'll just practice that and see whether it's something useful for us or not. So that's what we're going to do in this practice. So any questions about the practice?